Hello, welcome everyone. We are right at the top of the hour, and I'm really excited to be sitting in for my friend and colleague Mary Rowe to moderate this session today on how can cities respond to climate change. Excuse me. Before I begin, I of course want to start today's session with a very brief land acknowledgement to honor the traditional settlers of this land. Now, we're all logging in from different parts of this country, so I'll focus on where I am located, which is in Toronto, on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. I'm quite honored that ICLEI Canada's work happens across Turtle Island, which has traditionally been and is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people since time immemorial. And of course, we endeavor to listen and learn from Indigenous peoples in the process of delivering our work. So, as we start today's session, and I'll introduce our panelists very shortly, I wanted to start by just acknowledging what an exciting and busy and maybe overwhelming time it's been for climate in Canada and internationally, and even cities and communities as a focus of that. We've just come out of COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, and I'm hoping one of our presenters, Barbara, will be able to share some thoughts on having attended. We've just seen the release of the National Adaptation Strategy and all the excitement and really meaningful work that went into developing that strategy. And I'm hoping we'll have a little bit of a conversation around how do we get that implemented as a collective. But I thought I'd use my 2 seconds of introduction here to just mention some of the work that we've done in the last month in producing our Building Adaptive and Resilient Communities Impact Report. Some of you may know ICLEI, the organization for which I am managing director, has been running a national campaign for cities and towns around adaptation and resilience since 2007. And we've seen immense growth in the work in that time. We've also seen unprecedented impacts from across the country, most recently, with Hurricane Fiona out east. And so we took some time in developing that impact report to reflect on what we've heard and delivering this work with hundreds of communities, big and small, across the country, and to set a vision for the future. And I think for us, it goes without saying that we've set our sights on an inclusive and equitable future when it comes to climate action. And that's another theme I really hope that we can unpack a little bit as we move forward in our conversation today. So without further ado, I'll invite today's panelists to turn on their cameras and join me in video conversation. And I'll just perhaps introduce you verbally and give you a chance for some very quick opening remarks on that theme. And we'll really launch into the conversational nature of the CityTalk series together. So I'll start with the presenter, the panelist on my right, which is Barbara Swartzentruber. She's the founding executive director of the Smart Cities office at the City of Guelph. So Barbara, a couple of minutes, over to you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'll spend my opening minutes just reflecting on my experience at COP. It was my first time there, so a lot of a newbie. But I used it as a opportunity to kind of look at it through maybe rose-colored glasses. I wasn't thinking about what actually came out of it at the end in terms of high-level negotiations, and I turned a bit of a blind eye to the corporate lobbying and positioning. And so it really opened up a world to me about the literally millions, and I don't think that's an underestimation, of the efforts that are underway by subnational governments, by civil society groups, by individuals, by youth, by Indigenous peoples, the rich and diverse and varied responses to climate action were just incredible to see and incredibly inspiring. It was billed as a implementation COP, but many people felt that it was moving away a bit from mitigation and keeping the 1.5 degrees alive to adaptation strategies, which I think is certainly an important part of the conversation we're going to have today about the role of cities. And the intersectional issues of inequality, got somewhat beginning addressed through the loss and damage compensation that was program that was started there. But really, there was a tremendous discussion about how do we do this inclusive, just transition to a new clean economy. Certainly cities and local governments were at the forefront. For the first time, agriculture and food, which is important certainly to us and many people in terms of their economic systems, had a stronger focus, and the circular economy. So I'll stop there. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much, Barbara. Excited to have you. I wonder, Brett, if that's a nice segue to you, picking up on Barbara's comments around adaptation. And I know, Brett, that's a key part of the work you're doing. So before giving you the floor, Brett Huson is a friend and a Gitxsan author, knowledge keeper, and artist based in Winnipeg. So over to you, Brett, for an introduction.
Good morning. My name is Hetumsget. Many people know me by my government name, Brett Huson. Good morning, honorable men, honorable women, and everyone else of honorable birth. I come from the territory of the Caribou Ravine. I come from the House of the White Owl. I'm originally from the northwest interior of what settlers now call British Columbia. I'm from Gitxsan territory. So I work now with the University of Winnipeg at the Prairie Climate Center. I'm a research associate there, and as well as an author. I am a member of the Science Committee for Adaptation Futures, which is an adaptation conference that'll be happening next year in Montreal. So a lot of my work is very focused on connecting Indigenous knowledges into the adaptation planning world, looking at what Indigenous knowledges are, and kind of translating what those that information can be for people who are planners. So typically, a lot of times our knowledge systems have been stereotyped and relegated to subjective matter. And one of the kind of weaknesses with that is that, people tend to think that the extent of our knowledge is just about hunting and fishing. But you can't have complex civilizations for tens of thousands of years on territories without having complex governance systems and understandings of the land, very deep understandings of the land. So my hope is to look at utilizing these knowledges to help change human behavior that's happened now, because now you have a lot of people looking at climate anxiety, something that we have been going through for a couple of hundred years. And so a lot of the ways that we have been adapting ourselves, we've been having to adapt to severe, drastic changes to our land in the past 150 years. So it would be a good opportunity to look at what we've done to be able to adapt, because people are now having to do the same with the lands they are now on. So that's kind of where I want to bring the intersectionality between what we know to help people adapting where they're living now, which is on the lands we've been on for tens of thousands of years.
Thanks so much, Brett. I love this idea of weaving knowledge systems together. So I'm really excited for our conversation. Julius, I'll ask you to unmute your microphone and I'll introduce you. Julius Lindsay is a director of sustainable communities with the David Suzuki Foundation, and he's based here in Toronto.
Thanks, Eva. I'm also located in Dishwaswan Boone territory, and a lot of what I was thinking about when we were conceiving this talk and with your introductions is around engaging people in this conversation and communities specifically, but also the people that live within communities, within cities, within towns. And for context for the audience, I've been at the foundation for about a year, and I spent the 10 years before that in cities leading the development of climate change plans. And so I always refer to myself as a recovering public servant. And so a lot of my interest is how to bring people together within communities to do this work, to take climate action. And I think we spend a lot of time trying to get government to do that, but there's lots that people within communities can do. And I think it's really important to connect to the various parts of communities in that transition and in doing that work, because ensuring that all parts of the community and all peoples who live within those communities, especially marginalized and those most affected by climate change, are included in that conversation, are included in the solutions that are being proposed, is a really important part of that. But also just the, intersectionality has been mentioned here, and also the multidisciplinary nature of climate solutions is really important as well. And so bringing many voices to the table and to build solutions is a really important part of this work as well. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you, Julius. This idea of small C cities more than just local governments, but the things that make them up and the people that make them up, I think is a really important one that we can unpack today. I think you've teed up our last panelist, who may also classify himself as a recovering public servant quite nicely. David Miller, of course, for many needs no introduction, but is now the managing director with C40 Center for City Climate Policy and Economy. David, over to you.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the opportunity to be here today, and for the Canadian Urban Institute for organizing this very interesting panel. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I'm also here in the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, and want to acknowledge their presence, stewardship, and leadership over many centuries. I guess two things just from introduction perspective. The first is that I was not at this COP. However, I have been to several, to Glasgow, COP26, Paris COP21, and Copenhagen COP15, all of which were transformative COPs in different ways, and I had different roles at each. But it's clear from this COP and from the fact that this is the 28th year that national governments have come together to discuss the issue of climate change, that the process fundamentally is a failure. Yes, there has been progress. Paris was important. It was important in Egypt this year that national governments acknowledged loss and damage. But when we think about the urgency of addressing climate change, the science tells us we have to halve overall global emissions by 2030. That is 7 years. And if we're going to achieve that goal, it means we need to do everything that is possible today. We're not going to invent our way out of this by technologies that might arrive 10, 20, 30 years from now. We need to act today. And the consequences of not keeping within 1.5 are severe, as we can already begin to see from Canada's Arctic. Second point I want to make is that, from my perspective, given the structural challenges with international negotiations, and the structural challenges, essentially the negotiations have to be built around consensus. So when Prime Minister Harper was in Canada at COP15, the Canadian government systematically put brackets around words all over the agreements just to delay things. That's what you can do. And there'll always be somebody like that that's acting on the instigation of the oil industry to delay. Given that structural problem, what's the alternative? Well, if we are going to do everything that's possible over the next 7 years to dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions caused by the use of fossil fuels, we have to look to where the solutions are. And from my perspective, the real actions are happening in cities. Perhaps not enough, not enough at scale, certainly, otherwise we'd be on a different path, but the solutions are to be found there. And I look forward to today's conversation about how we find those solutions, how we ensure they're inclusive, how we learn from traditional knowledge, not just science, and how we work together to really expedite the solutions, because if we don't, the consequences are real and extremely serious.
So it sounds like from your opening remarks that we're coming at this issue from a number of perspectives, all of which though speak to the need for more action, increased action, and a different way of taking action from within cities. So perhaps we can pick up on something, Barbara, that you started at the beginning of your remarks, this idea of implementation. And David, of course, you carried that forward, that there is some happening, perhaps not at scale or not commensurate with the level of action required from the scientific community and from the impacts we're seeing. I wonder if somebody would like to kind of pick up on this narrative of how can we keep that implementation moving further, faster, given the timelines given to us from the scientific community and from the targets set by our own communities and governments.
Well, I'll just jump in on that. But first I'll say I got overexcited to talk about COP and just want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And I think I agree with David. The urgency can only be met at a local, regional level, and cities working with communities, working with business, working with researchers, Indigenous groups, people that for a long time have understood what the impact and the urgency is. I think that cities are doing a great job, and they're really first responders. And but I think there's more that can be done in terms of using all the levers at their disposal, including economic focused levers. In Guelph, we're working on creating a circular economy. We're focused on the agri-food system, but it is a massive undertaking of so many leaders across all sectors of our community, and working really hard to create space and center Indigenous and marginalized voices. But the ways in which you do that, I think there's more levers that cities can use, from procurement to economic development to urban planning. And they know how to do that. They know how to do it fast. They're on the front line in terms of responding to resident and citizen needs. And so I think there's more, but they definitely need the support and policy levers, the private sector finance, but I really think it has to be done at the local level.
One of the things that struck me from Brett and Julius, your comments, was thinking about the issue of intersectionality and climate. That is a slow moving process. That is a systems change. We're addressing systemic crises related to, colonialism and reconciliation, as well as racism and equity. How can we balance the need for speed and action and implementation with these kind of systemic problems that need to be addressed, but they cannot be addressed transactionally? I wonder if you have thoughts on kind of that tension, or the way I perceive it anyway, a tension.
Well, I think one of the biggest components that we have to look at right now is just the tokenism of, I would say, like the Indigenous way of life. Even the term saying traditional knowledges, it's a Eurocentric term that places a time period on a knowledge system that has never stopped. We have constantly evolved and we have constantly adapted throughout thousands of years. So our knowledge systems are now, they're current. I'm a representation of that. There are many young people younger than me who are representations of that are doing the same thing that I'm doing. One of the unique opportunities that we have in this era is looking at social media. So a lot of people find that could be a risk, but the only ones that find that a risk are the ones who have to listen to those of us who are having a voice finally. So it's a change of the systems through who the people are actually listening to. And this goes not even to just the Indigenous communities, but you look at the communities that are at risk. So there's a lot of talk about how to put the onus onto civilians about climate change and how they're recycling and what they're consuming. But you look at what is put in front of people. The cheapest foods for low-income communities are the most garbage or wasteful types of foods. The most healthy and what the foods that provide well-being for everyone are the most expensive. So the system is set up for industrialization of consumption. And this doesn't allow for people to even have the ability to consider climate change and adaptation. So when we want to mobilize people, we need more people to be able to do things like vote in different policies or vote in whatever it may be. But a lot of those people can't take the time to consider that because they're just trying to survive. So there's a lot of things that are disconnected. There's great ideals out there for people to say, oh, we can do this, this, and this if we just get more people on board. But you look at what people are having to do now, there's less and less middle class. And it's really kind of hampering what people are able to do in urban centers. So a lot of the organizations that I volunteer with are trying to work with at-risk communities. And we're trying to help them consider a more environmental way of doing things, but a lot of them are just surviving.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the talk about infrastructure and stuff like that, you have large urban centers getting water from where Indigenous communities are, like here in Winnipeg at Shoal Lake 40. And there are many communities across the country that don't even have clean drinking water. So there's a lot of consideration needs to be taken in, not just from Indigenous communities, but all of the communities that are at risk, because that would enable us to have overall human change and behavior, because that's what's causing it. The climate change is a symptom of human behavior. And that's one of the things we have to look at changing.
Mm-hmm.
I would just add to that those are all amazing points. And I would just add to that that's where that slow versus fast tension comes in, because I think a lot of these issues, when you talk about poverty, when you talk about racism, when you talk about a lot of these issues, there's a slow and a fast component to it. There is the slow component of systems change and relationship change, but there's also the fast component of addressing issues as they may rise or things that can be done now. And I think within the climate movement, we have this urgency of like, oh, we have 10 years left, so we have to do everything, when there is a slow and a fast component. So that's not to say that neither one has to take precedence over others, but I think it's really a both and I think we traditionally have spent a lot of time around the fast component of this work and not spent the time on the slow component. And I think part of the reason why personally I think intersectionality is so important is because it's going to connect us to the other symptoms of the systems that are breaking, that is causing climate change and causing other challenges within our world. And so we have to make those connections to those systems, to the changes that we need, to the relationships that need to be built, to the social ills that manifest in many different ways, including, people more affected by climate change, including people more affected by poverty, including people not having clean drinking water. Because if we continue to focus just on those fast changes or on the urgency, then we will never address those underlying issues that are causing some of these things. And the drawing connections between those various movements, between those various issues, there's been a lot of work done in that area, and it is quite simple in some ways. And so drawing those connections will also make those solutions more robust, because we're going to think about all the ways in which the systems that govern our world are creating these sort of challenges within our communities. And I think that's a really important part of implementation, because it's easy to implement a solution that doesn't help everybody, that pushes people more to the fringes. And if we don't understand how our systems are pushing people to the fringes, then we can never prevent those solutions that reside within that system to continue to push people to those margins.
So if we think then around these solutions and kind of the city role in this, obviously there's many levers that cities can use or action mechanisms, right? Land use, different policies, bylaws, workforce development, leadership at a political or an elected level. But there are limits in those mandates or tools. I'm wondering if the panel could reflect a little bit on how other sectors can support implementation and action at the local level. And that could be private actors, academic institutions, the civil society, not-for-profit, to help complement those tools or levers that cities might have. David, can I offer that to you?
I've got a few thoughts on that, and I want to start with Brett and Julius's interventions, which I don't want to oversimplify, but I think speak to the necessity of everyone having a real say over the decisions that are affecting their lives. And in the context of climate, what this means to me is that the best practices in some of the world's biggest cities, like Los Angeles, for example, are to ensure that when the city develops a climate plan, that everybody is engaged in developing it. And in that way, the plan has the potential, and in Los Angeles's case, I think met that potential, to actually meet the needs of the different neighborhoods, groups of people, other constituencies. And that's really important. And to me, that's the slow part, which is about what I would call engagement. It's not about consultation, it's about recognizing that people have a right to a real say over the decisions that affect their lives. That's a broader principle than climate. But if you start with that from climate, you can actually reach quite different conclusions than you might if you had a top-down strategy and you have a more robust plan. And that's important. Secondly, because climate change is a collective problem that needs to be solved by collective actions. And many of the things we need to do aren't things that a person is going to do. Or two, Brett and I may agree that we shouldn't use electricity from coal-fired power plants, but we don't have the individual ability as individuals to shut them down. That's something that needs to be done collectively through our governments. And I think what cities of all sizes, actually, particularly the mayor, but when supported by council, have the ability to do is use their bully pulpit to pull people together and institutions together to address the collective problem and help drive collective solutions. So, for example, in Sydney and Melbourne, Australia, the cities do not have regulatory authority over electricity. They do not own their utilities. But they've driven significant change by working with other large institutions in those cities, like universities, hospitals, and other big energy consumers, to say to the private companies, we're not going to buy your electricity unless it's clean. And that use of the bully pulpit is really powerful. I'll give you a second example. London and New York worked together starting about 7 years ago on the issue of divestment. And there'd been quite a big divestment movement, which was not very successful, trying to stop the investment by large institutions, pension funds, et cetera, in fossil fuels, modeled on what people my age protested about South Africa, which was effective. And New York and London, as cities, through their mayors, agreed to divest their pension plans from investments in fossil fuels. Those are the two largest financial hubs in the world, at least arguably. That unlocked action on divestment all over the place. Even the University of Toronto, a very conservative institution, finally agreed to divest its pension fund. So I think that bully pulpit's really important. And cities are uniquely placed to bring people together, not just at the individual people level, but the private sector, institutions, and others, to express the urgency, but to do that in an inclusive way. And to me, that's where the hope should be, with that kind of bully pulpit leadership provoking really important actions.
That convening power, David, strikes me as also another really important tool in addressing what we've been calling the slow portion of the equation, right? To ensure that the right voices and historically marginalized voices are front and center at that convening or the connection power that cities can play.
Yes, agreed. Disempowered voices, whether today or historically, need to be given a priority to be at the table. And sorry, I don't want to dominate this conversation, but I missed one point. Climate change is caused by the rich. It's caused by the rich within countries and between countries. It's a problem caused by the very richest people in the history of human civilization. So it's wrong that the burden of solving it should be on those who are out of power. And that's why it's so critical that people be at the table to develop the strategies to solve the problem caused by the rich, which is having the biggest impact on the least well-off, certainly globally, and also within cities and towns.
Any other reflections on the role of non-city actors in supporting kind of community action or small C city action on climate change?
I was going to add that, and I liked David's point about cities being conveners, but I also think the other way is possible as well of city actors connecting to each other and the city being a conduit of growing that or bringing it to scale or supporting that. The example that I use is when I was working in Mississauga, the cement plant in the city was looking at how to build for lack of a better term, a hydrogen ecosystem within the city, that they had very cheap electricity rates because they're a large consumer in Ontario. And so they could use that to produce hydrogen that would help decarbonize the city's bus fleet, the city's taxi fleet. It would give access to normal people to have hydrogen. And that was sort of something that they had done on their own, but the city was a key part of sort of bringing that to scale and making it financially viable. And so I think it's really important, not only for the city, but for others within cities and communities, that small C part, to connect around creating solutions in their neighborhoods, in their cities, in their regions, et cetera, et cetera. I've had conversations with folks in the social sector around community resiliency and like creating that at a very local level. Like, how does a building build a community resilience plan for itself, like a building tower like we have in Toronto? Because many of those people are tenants, that many of them are low income, some of them are disabled or living with other equity challenges, but also those people know each other the best because they're in the building together. And so how can those types of plans be created at that hyper local level for people to support each other, because the knowledge is there. A city will never have the knowledge or never have really good knowledge of what's going on in every community within their city. And so part of that is passing that power to those people in those communities, passing that power to the people who live in certain areas, passing the mic, as I heard one of my colleagues say on another panel, to be able to empower people to be able to do those things in those places. And so I think it's creating those connections among companies, among different actors. And as I said earlier in the conversation, you're going to get really interesting, innovative, robust solutions by bringing these various actors together.
It almost sounds, Julius, if I can put words in your mouth, to almost get out of the way of that innovation sometimes, right? To convene it, but then let that magic happen without you as the holder of that pen.
And I think that's a key part of this, as we've been saying, the slow part of this, is that, you don't know now who might get together and build a solution that will, accelerate carbon action in your city. Like, I would have never, if I was thinking about hydrogen, I would have never thought of our cement plant within our city, but they were a catalyst because it serves different purposes for their business plan. And so I think it's really important for those relationships to happen. And they were partnering with another company that, a few other companies that were working on hydrogen. And so like part of it is just creating the space for those people to get together and have those conversations and come up with solutions. And that's a part of the getting out of the way, but part of that slow work of building relationships and for people getting to know each other. And this is part of the reason why hearing from marginalized voices, hearing from marginalized communities is so important, because those people may have solutions and ways of looking at the problem that, you know, the dominant majority and those in the know do not have and may never come up with. And so if we don't create those kind of creative collisions, we'll never get those solutions. And so I think that's a really important part of this work.
Yeah, I just, if I can, want to jump in, because that's entirely our experience in Guelph, Wellington. Because we won the Smart City Challenge, we were able to take that funding from the federal government and channel it into the community and support tables of cross-sectoral leaders and citizens who wanted to take action. So we spent, the slow part is, we spent probably 18 months creating a shared vision and very clear objectives. And that's the hard, long, slogging work to get all of the sectors working together. But the city, I think the city has to get out of the way, but there's a continuing role to be a convener, catalyst, and to create that platform, because that convening, connecting work takes a lot of time, and the cities definitely have the resources to be able to support all of those organizations, university, business sector, to come together. And now the benefit of taking that slower approach is that there are over 60 projects underway within our community. We partnered with the County of Wellington, because I think a lot of these solutions have to be urban, rural, connected to the surrounding ecosystem. We could never be doing this work, the city by itself could never have had the capacity to create 60 projects that are really changing the economic and social system towards that shared vision that the community developed over time. It's not perfect, but it's incredibly amazing. And I think we need new models of leadership and delivery, how cities and communities work together, particularly in the area of climate change.
You know, one of the things that I kind of keep thinking about when, you know, we talk about looking at an urban center or any municipality of any size, really, talking about connecting to different voices, I think about the things that cannot speak for themselves as well. And one of the things that any municipalities or urban centers has done is they've created a little human bubble that they have cut off from the rest of the world. They only look at the infrastructure and the sectors as they are within the urban center, not really thinking about the far-reaching impacts that they have on the consumption, with the consumption of the stuff that comes into the city. So you look at everything from, you know, where the water is coming from, but also the things that are imported. You know, everything that a city does has far-reaching impacts on the land, and they have to start really taking into consideration what is actually being consumed within the city. New building projects, where is that concrete coming from? Where is the steel coming from? Where is the timber coming from? What kind of impacts are you having on the land for what you are doing? So, you know, looking at what Indigenous perspectives are, and not just Indigenous, there's a pluriverse of perspectives out there that can help kind of round out the visions that we can have to better the future for people. And I think urban centers need to start to plan for the land and not for humans. So as you look as an example, risk assessments typically are done, how is this going to impact the bottom line? How is this going to impact us? But not how is it going to impact the ecosystem to the smallest degree, even to like a fungus. You know, how's it going to impact this fungus? Not knowing that this fungus is what connects everything nearby, which provides the clean air and the water that you drink. So there are far-reaching things that can impact other communities. So as an example, here in Winnipeg, they have floodways. With increased extreme weathers, they're going to have floods. And those floods, they have to go somewhere. So they open the floodways, they flood other communities. In particular, they've been flooding First Nations communities. And these are the things that impact everyone. So I think one of the changes that need to happen within the system is not just the voices of the people, but the voices of the land itself. Who can speak for the land? You you know, a lot of the assessments that are done are typically based on how they will impact people only. But I think they need to kind of go to how are we impacting everything? Like even the far reaching impacts, you know, a lot of stuff that develop new cities and infrastructures come from far off places. So I think there just kind of needs to be a greater assessment, because that's going to change the impacts that we are having or leaving on the land itself, not just from a carbon footprint perspective, but everything. The carbon footprint idea is okay, but it's not enough. It's just a very small, minute stepping point. And there has to be a larger, greater scale of assessment taken into account.
Yeah, broadening that understanding of risk really to kind of ecosystem-wide risks, which is what I think you're referring to, as well as kind of social health and well-being risks, asset risks, and financial risk, I think will allow us to identify solutions that pursue multiple benefits, right? It'll diversify the types of things we're designing to prevent that risk. And we're seeing a lot of that conversation emerge around, you know, nature-based solutions that can provide ecosystem benefits if done well and properly, and considering biodiversity and human health and ecosystem health, from solutions that focus on asset management. There was a question that came into the chat that kind of echoed this idea of solutions. And I thought I'd ask our panelists this question, where the attendee is asking, during the conversation, can the panelists summarize the various actions, policies that cities can implement for adaptation and mitigation? In particular, what are the ones that are being shown to be most effective? So I wonder if anybody would like to take a stab of just one or two things that they've heard of, seen firsthand. David, you had a couple in your opening remarks from Sydney and elsewhere that could be replicated across our country and more broadly.
Yeah, I can give a few. I guess just first, before I do, I think Brett's point about the connection to land and nature is a very powerful one, and I think a lot more needs to be done on that. Toronto has done good work about thinking about water on a watershed basis, which is really important, but it's not, it's, as far as I'm aware, it's just water. It's not thinking about the other things that Brett talked about. So I think it's a very thoughtful point, and I agree with that. What are the leading cities doing? Well, first of all, you need a carbon inventory. Where are the emissions coming from? Beyond just the city, everybody, the whole geographic area. Typically, that's transportation, how we heat and cool buildings and how we build them, how we manage waste, and how we generate electricity. And there are really interesting examples of actions from climate plans that have been built in an inclusive way in all of those areas. And I'll just give a couple because they're timely and topical. The first is what Oslo is doing within the area that it controls. So it has a climate plan for Oslo, geographic area, assuming all sorts of actions by the private sector. But that's important because nobody else can do that. So they're saying, here's what has to be done in this geographic area. For its part, the city's developing a climate budget, not just a city budget. So if you want to build a new curling rink and have all those great Norwegian curlers in those fabulous trousers have a new place to curl, you have to have an allocation of carbon as well, not just money. And to me, that's one of the most important things that city governments are doing globally, because you can think about that being done by provincial and national governments in Canada, by the private sector, by all of our institutions. What amount of carbon, if the world's going to stay to 1.5 degrees, what's more or less our allocation? And that's all we've got. So your activities can't emit more than that. Really positive. A second thing is there's been very difficult, particularly in the North American context, for various reasons, particularly lobbying, for us to decarbonize buildings. New ones, there's some potential, things really happening. Some good work on energy retrofits, but real decarbonizing, not quite yet. Montreal has announced a partnership with Hydro-Quebec to effectively take natural gas out of its buildings. And that's one of the things that I had in mind when I said, you know, it's a collective thing. That's very hard for an individual tenant in a 20-story residential rental apartment building in the middle of a city to do, in fact, impossible, but it can be done through the collective. And that Montreal program, if that spread quickly across cities, could be really instrumental in lowering the living costs for people, done right, and taking a significant amount of greenhouse gases out of the air.
Yeah, it just one of the things that I think of, I attended this really great conference recently called Livable Cities, and we had heard a number of really great projects that were happening on a municipal level. And I think one of those things is just thinking about the at-risk communities in particular, was changing the usability of green spaces, including people's front yards and boulevards. So there are a couple places, I think, in Vancouver and Victoria, and I know that it exists in a couple other municipalities as well, where they've changed, or they're either in pilot stages, or they've actually changed the policy of how people can use their front yards. And so people can rent someone's front yard, or they can use the yard themselves to create produce. And I know there are some places where produce is being created on someone's front yard, and that person sells the produce, and the person with the yard, all they wanted was some of the produce for their home. So so the person will give them the food, and in turn they get to use that property to generate enough for themselves, and they sell at farmers markets, and they do make enough to have a living for themselves or supplement the living of their family. So there's kind of this opportunity to change what green spaces are. So I'm sitting on right now on a committee for the city of Winnipeg to help look at green spaces, how green spaces are being used here in the city. And that's kind of one of the things that, you know, we're looking at is how can we change what green spaces are for people, you know, getting rid of this front lawn aesthetic, this, you know, for some reason we keep dumping tons of water and chemical into this weed, and it's a weed, to show off who can have the biggest front yard is something that comes from, you know, way back, not from here. But it's, you know, you can have very comfortable and good living spaces with produce in the front end. It looks just as beautiful. I've seen a number of gardens here in Winnipeg who people have them in the front yard, and it looks amazing. It doesn't take away from their property. It, in my opinion, adds value because they plant certain things, flowers to keep away the pests, and those flowers make everything look beautiful. And then when produce is growing, it does look really nice. So there's opportunities, I think, to do things like that. And I'm just thinking on the initial small scale for the people who come from those communities.
I would add that I think there's, to stay on the theme that we've been talking around the slow part of this and that connection piece, there's a number of different actions and programs that I've seen that are around that connection to what's going on in the community and to people who are sort of outside of cities. I think of the PCM model in Montreal, I can't pronounce it in French, but the Montreal Climate Partnership, and bringing together philanthropy, business, the city, others to take climate action in the city, and how that model has catalyzed sort of actors across the municipality to a program that I personally love, and I think is a lot smaller. It's called the Lighthouse Program, and it's in the city of Brampton. And what they do is that they basically provide resources to faith-based buildings within the city, whether it's gurdwaras or churches or mosques, because those buildings are A, embedded in those communities, B, know the community better than the city ever will, and C, are places that people in the community are familiar with and would go to on a regular basis. And so their emergency management department has provided resources to base those places to basically be like ports in a storm, whether it is a literal storm or there's some sort of other disaster going on in the city. And there's an education piece to that. There's a community engagement piece to that. And again, to that sort of passing the mic, they've empowered those buildings to be able to do it and connect with the communities, because those communities know those people better than anyone else. And so I love that as an example, because many of especially on the adaptation side, a lot of our solutions are going to be hyper local. And so we need to think about how we connect with those communities and how we build trust with those communities as well, because that's the other thing about those faith-based buildings. They will have trust in the community that the city literally will never have. And so how do you build trust in those communities? How do you connect to those communities is an important part of the way that we think about this work. I use an example on the other side is that there was a program in Detroit where they the city was basically giving away trees. So you basically called the city, they would come to your house, they plant a tree on your front lawn free of charge, nothing other than that call you had to do, and nobody was uptaking the program. And so somebody was like, oh, let's go out and talk to people and find out why they're not uptaking the program. And when they went and talked to people in the community, they were like, yeah, back in the 70s, they came and cut down these trees so that police could surveil our neighborhoods. And so we don't trust the city, and we don't trust anything to do with trees in our neighborhoods. And so if you don't spend that time building that trust and building those connections to the community, doesn't matter what program you come up with or what the action is, it may not be successful with the people that you're trying to reach.
Yeah, that's a really great example. And just quickly on the Lighthouse Project, which we were involved with as an organization, one of the most fascinating ways is how the city got out of the way. The only requirement they had on the faith centers was that as a lighthouse, as that port in a storm, they be non-denominational, that they open their doors to anybody who is looking for help in an event, whether that's a climate event or otherwise. And I think they cut out the legal tensions of having these officially labeled as resilience hubs and kind of let them evolve and happen naturally. I think it's a really, really fantastic example. Barbara, I want to give you a chance to share some of your solutions that you've seen.
Yeah, I'm gonna focus on the food system and the work that's happening in our area. But I saw in the chat, circular economy initiatives are popping up across Canada because 55% of the way we get to net zero is certainly through energy solutions, but the 45% is how we produce, consume, and manage land and our food systems. And so there's some really interesting work that's happening, and it highlights the way that the private sector can get involved. We have support from different banks and insurance companies that are helping us do things like how do you create a new circular economy for construction and demolition waste that comes from renovations and buildings, and how do you help businesses who are moving towards circular solutions and products? Because back to the question about convenience, people want to do the right thing, but it also has to be convenient. We need the services and the products and the approaches that we can access that are convenient and are climate friendly. And just even creating relationship with the local farmers and supporting regenerative farming, connecting it to your local farmers market, connecting it to food security. Interesting work going on in social prescribing for food for people that are food insecure. Lots of stuff happening. I put our links in the chat, but I think cities can play a stronger role in supporting the local food system.
One of the things that strikes me in your 4 interventions there with examples is just the diversity of size and scale of solutions, from large corporate partnerships to remove natural gas from building stock, as David pointed out, to really small scale people-centered connections of where they live and what they eat and what that is used for. So the need for interventions at all scales. And we've heard former Victoria Mayor Lisa Helps talk about 10 million projects to be done to get us towards net zero, to get us towards increased climate resilience. And we've got just a few minutes left. I wonder if I could trouble you all to leave our audience with something actionable, something that they could take on, whether it's in 24 hours or 24 days or 24 months, to help make their cities and their communities meet that climate change challenge.
Yeah, I think there's just so much education out there already about reduce, reuse, recycle. It's been like that since I was a child in the 80s. So I think people don't need so much to know what they can do individually. But what I think people can do action-wise, because they should know already what to do because it's been there since I was a child, is to actually look to your local MLA, your municipal representative, your MP, and to really kind of voice their concerns. And I think get them to look at supporting certain types of policies if you can. So writing letters, not even just as an individual, but maybe you can get together with a community group and collectively submit something with signatures, or, you know, those are the kinds of things that I think should happen on that sort of level. But I think as a group, I think just doing the actions and worrying about getting in trouble later. What I mean by that is, you know, if you see something in the city that you want to change, and you don't want to wait for all this bylaw stuff to kind of go through, just kind of start doing it. Then they'll have to take the action and look at what they need to change around that. So I think for us, a lot of climate action is what we take on the land itself. You know, like there's a lot of us who are constantly labeled as protesters and antagonists, but we're just worried about the land. And I think that's what we really need to do is push the boundary by taking those actions in a very safe and respectful way. And that's, I think, one of the things that can push people towards actually having dialogue around what can actually make change.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, go ahead, Barbara.
Oh, I was just going to jump in on that and say, you know what? Show up at city council with your neighbors, support local organizations who are taking action in this area. They certainly need volunteers and help to do it. But I think it really comes back to exercising all of your options in a democracy, including everything that Brett was suggesting.
I was just going to add, and I will name the person that I pulled the quote from. Her name is Saba Khan, and she's one of the leads in Environmentalism. And I see in the chat that there's many people here, and I figured from this event it would attract many people who work in this area or who are working on climate action. And so my point to leave with everybody here would be to figure out ways to pass the mic and figure out ways that you can empower others to do this work, and not be about what do I do or what are the actions that need to be taken that I need to tell somebody to do, but figure out how you empower somebody else to tell you what to do, or empower somebody else to create a solution that will help the climate crisis. Because I think oftentimes in this work, we are focused on these solutions when these solutions are just whatever somebody came up with that they thought might be good. And there could be other solutions that someone else, if empowered, could come up with. And so that's what I would leave with, at least the folks on this call who work in the climate space.
I'd add to those comments. Very loosely, I would describe those comments as saying, use your actions and use your voices. Way more subtle than that, but I'd add one more to it, which is use your vote. Really matters. You know, the biggest negative impact we're going to see on both our ability to mitigate climate change and our ability to adapt to it in southwestern Ontario is Bill 23, which has just been passed to pave over huge swaths of farmland in the Greenbelt. It's outrageous. Goes against everything Brett was talking about thinking about the land first as opposed to people. The whole process has been outrageous, and if people had used their vote, we might not be in this position. So, you know, I fully agree and like the idea we need to empower others to tell us what to do. We need to do what we can in our own lives. Food's a good place to start, transportation, you know, do you really need a car, etc. But our votes really matter. If we elect the right people, we've got a real chance of creating the kind of dialogue between people and their governments that will produce results, which is what we've been talking about for the last hour.
I think that's a very powerful note to leave on. So with less than a minute left, I will thank each of you, Barbara, Brett, Julius, David, for not only your comments today, but the incredible work that you're leading in your parts of the world and across our country and internationally. I'd also like to thank the Canadian Urban Institute for the platform to have this conversation today. I know it is being recorded. The chat is being saved. There are a ton of ideas in that chat and links and strategies. So I thank everyone and wish you all best of luck in your work, and hopefully our paths will cross again soon. Thanks so much.
It was nice to meet you guys.
Yes, it was nice to meet you too.
Nice to meet you too.
Take care.
Bye.